The morning my husband told his brother I was comfortable but forgettable, I was sitting 3 feet away, pretending to read. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't check if I was listening. He just said it the way you'd comment on the weather, like my presence in the room was so unremarkable that even basic discretion didn't apply. Natalie's fine, he said into the phone. She's just, comfortable. Not exactly the kind of woman you brag about. I turned a page I hadn't read. That was a Tuesday in November. The kind of gray, flat Tuesday that feels like it was made specifically to deliver news you'll carry for years. I didn't say anything. I folded the corner of my page, set the book down, and went to make tea. And while the kettle boiled, I stood at the window, looking out at the backyard, the one I'd quietly paid off the mortgage on 8 months earlier, and I made a decision. Not about revenge. I want to be clear about that. I've never been particularly interested in revenge. What I decided, standing in my kitchen on that Tuesday, was that I was done being invisible inside my own life. My husband's name is Derek. We met at a graduate program at the University of Toronto 12 years ago, when I was 29, and he was 32. He was doing an MBA. I was finishing a master's in architecture. He was the kind of man who filled a room without trying, loud laugh, firm handshake, the sort of confidence that reads as competence until you've known someone long enough to tell the difference. I was quieter. I always have been. My mother used to say I was still water deep. She meant it as a compliment. Derek, early on, said the same thing. He said he'd never met anyone who made him feel so settled. We got married 4 years in. A small ceremony at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. My parents, his parents, a handful of friends. Nothing extravagant. I wore my grandmother's earrings and Derek cried when I walked down the aisle, and I thought, this is the person, this is who I'm building with. I should tell you what I do for a living, though I want to explain it the way I actually lived it, not the way it sounds on paper. I'm an architect. I started my own firm 8 years ago, 2 years after we got married. Derek was working in corporate finance at the time, pulling in a solid salary good enough that when I left my firm to go independent, he told his friends we'd decided I would try something on my own for a while. Like it was a hobby. Like I was taking up pottery. The first 2 years were hard. I won't pretend otherwise. I worked from our second bedroom, took every contract I could find, drove 3 hours to Barrie for a meeting that paid me $600. Derek picked up more of the living costs during that stretch, groceries, utilities, our Netflix account, and I was genuinely grateful. I told him so. Often, what I didn't tell him was when things started to turn. It wasn't a dramatic shift. It was gradual, the way all real things are. A referral from a satisfied client. A small commercial project in the distillery district that got written up in a design blog. Another referral. Then another. By year 4 of the firm, I had a team of 7. By year 6, we'd won 2 regional design awards and were working on a mixed-use development in Waterloo that would eventually be featured in Canadian Architect magazine. I kept the finances separate. Not deceptively, there was no malicious intent, no grand scheme. I kept them separate because Derek had always handled his own money and I'd always handled mine. We had a joint account for household expenses that we both contributed to equally. But our personal accounts were our own. That was the agreement we'd always had. The problem was the agreement stopped reflecting reality somewhere around year 5, and neither of us updated it. By then, I was contributing far more to the household than Derek was quietly topping up the joint account when his quarterly bonus didn't come through, covering the property tax when the assessment came in higher than expected, paying for the renovation on the kitchen because I wanted it and didn't want to wait. I didn't make a production of it, I just handled it. The way I handled most things. Derek, meanwhile, had moved through 2 job changes and was now a senior director at a mid-size investment firm in the financial district. He did well. He had a good salary, a decent bonus structure, a wardrobe that cost more than most people's car payments. He talked about money the way people do when they feel like they've earned the right to have opinions about it. He talked about my work the way people do when they've never quite taken it seriously. Architecture is tough, he'd say, at dinner parties, when someone asked about my firm. It's a real grind. Natalie's done well to keep it going. Keep it going. Like I was maintaining a vegetable garden. Like endurance was the ceiling of what I could be expected to achieve. I stopped correcting him at some point. I'm not entirely sure when. I think I told myself it didn't matter that I knew what I'd built, and that was enough. I think I was wrong about that. The phone call with his brother wasn't the first sign. Looking back, I can trace the pattern much further. The way Derek would introduce me at his work events and then smoothly redirect conversation away from anything I might say. The way he'd tell stories from our life together and somehow always position himself as the protagonist. The way he once told me, when I mentioned we'd been shortlisted for a major project in Calgary, "That's great, babe. Try not to get your hopes up, though those big ones usually go to the established firms." We had 31 employees by then. We were the established firm. But the phone call was the moment I stopped explaining it away. Because it wasn't a bad day. It wasn't frustration or stress or a careless comment in an argument. It was casual. It was comfortable. He said it the way you say something you've said so many times in your own head that it doesn't even feel like an opinion anymore, just a fact. Something obvious. Something true. Comfortable but forgettable. I thought about those words for a long time. Not with the hot, immediate hurt I might have expected, more with a kind of slow, spreading clarity. Like finally turning on a light in a room you've been navigating in the dark for years and realizing the furniture has been in completely different places than you thought. I thought about the 7 years I'd spent building something real. The team I'd hired and trained. The buildings with my firm's name attached that were standing in 3 provinces. The equity I'd been quietly, methodically accumulating in the firm, in our property, in a real estate investment trust I'd started contributing to 4 years ago on the advice of my accountant. I thought about the offer. The offer had come 6 weeks before that phone call. A development group out of Vancouver, serious people, not a fishing expedition, had approached us about acquiring a 60% stake in the firm. The number they put on the table was $14.2 million for that stake, which valued the whole firm at just under $24 million. My remaining 40%, after the deal closed, would be worth approximately $9.6 million. Plus, I'd stay on as principal architect with an employment agreement and profit sharing. I'd been sitting with it. Running the numbers. Talking to my accountant, to my lawyer, to my business partner, Simone, who'd been with me from year 2, and would also benefit significantly from the deal. I hadn't mentioned it to Derek because, and I want to be honest about this, I hadn't felt ready to share it with someone who referred to my work as something I'd managed to keep going. After the phone call, I called Simone. "Tell me again what the timeline looks like," I said. "Closing set for February," she said. "Why? I'm going to sign." There was a pause. "Okay. Are you all right?" "I think I'm finally getting there," I said. I didn't blow anything up. I want to be clear about that too, because I think there's a version of this story where the woman decides to perform her own vindication, the elaborate dinner, the documents slid across the table, the gasps of the assembled witnesses. I've read those stories. I understand their appeal. But that's not who I am, and honestly, after reading the comments on enough of those videos, I'm not sure it's even the most satisfying ending. What I did was simpler. Quieter. More permanent. I called a real estate lawyer. I had already owned our home jointly with Derek, but I'd also inherited a property in Prince Edward County from my aunt, a small farmhouse on 7 acres that I'd been renting out for the past 5 years. I'd been quietly paying down the mortgage on that property, with rental income, and it was nearly clear. I had it assessed. It came back at $890,000. I also sat down with my financial planner and got a full picture, something I'd been putting off because, if I'm honest, I knew what it would show me, and I wasn't ready to reckon with it. The full picture showed me a woman who had been financially carrying far more than her share of a partnership for years. The top-ups to the joint account. The property tax. The kitchen renovation. The car I'd leased in my name when Derek's credit took a hit after a bad quarter. The weekend in Montreal I'd put on my card and never mentioned. None of it dramatic on its own. Together, it was a portrait. I printed it out and put it in a folder. Not to show anyone, just to have it. To stop letting it live only in my own head, where it could be minimized. In January, I told Derek I wanted to talk about our finances. He seemed surprised we rarely did, formally. I laid out what I'd prepared. Calmly, no heat in it, the way I'd present a design rationale to a client. Here is what the last 6 years have looked like. Here is what I've contributed. Here is what the firm is worth. Here is the offer I'm accepting next month. He stared at the papers for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said finally. "I kept waiting for you to ask," I said. You never did. That's the part that stays with me. Not the numbers. The numbers were never really the point. The part that stays with me is that in 7 years of building something extraordinary, my husband never once sat down and asked me how the firm was actually doing. He asked how I was doing, sometimes. He asked if I was tired, if I needed help with dinner, if I'd remembered to schedule the furnace inspection. Normal life questions. Good husband questions, in some ways. But he never asked, "What have you built? What does it look like from the inside? What are you proud of?" And this is the part I have to own, I let that silence stand. I told myself I didn't need his validation to know my own worth. Which is true. But I also used that truth to avoid a harder one, that I'd been making myself easy to overlook. That I'd confused humility with invisibility, and called it strength. I am not unremarkable. I never was. But I participated, for years, in the project of making myself seem so, tucking away the evidence of what I'd actually accomplished, never pushing back on the diminishments, staying quiet in rooms where I should have spoken. I'm not doing that anymore. The acquisition closed on a Thursday in February, in a boardroom on the 38th floor of a building in downtown Toronto. There were lawyers on both sides, my accountant, Simone, and the lead partner from the Vancouver group, a woman named Patricia, who shook my hand and said, "We've been watching your firm for 2 years. We almost reached out sooner." I signed the documents. Simone signed her documents. The wire transfer confirmation landed in my inbox at 3:47 inches the afternoon. $9.6 million, with the employment agreement running 5 years. I sat in the car afterward for a while before I drove home. Not crying. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that follows something you've been carrying for a long time finally being set down. Derek and I had started the process of separating in December. Amicably, so far, at least in the legal sense. My lawyer had advised me that because the firm had been started after our marriage, there would likely be some consideration of it as a family asset, and we were in the process of working through that. I won't pretend it's been simple. It hasn't. There are parts of Derek I still love, or love the memory of the man who cried at our wedding, who drove 2 hours in a snowstorm once because I'd called him upset about a project, who has his own genuine goodnesses that I'm not trying to erase. But there are also parts of a life I've been carrying alone that I'm not willing to carry anymore. The press release about the acquisition went out the following Monday. Design and Architecture Industry Publications. A short piece in the Globe and Mail's business section. LinkedIn, where these things have a way of moving fast in professional circles. I found out through Simone that Derek had seen it. She heard from a mutual friend. I don't know exactly what the moment was like for him. I wasn't there, and honestly, I didn't arrange for anyone to be. That was never the goal. What I know is that my phone spent most of that Monday buzzing with messages from colleagues, former clients, people I'd worked with years ago who'd seen the news. A woman I'd mentored 2 summers ago sent me a voice note that I had to listen to twice because my eyes kept blurring. My mother called and said, simply, "I always knew," which made me laugh and cry at the same time. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, Derek texted me. Just 3 words, "I didn't know." I read it, set my phone down, and went back to work. Because here's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I'd want anyone in a similar place to hear. The problem was never that he didn't know about the money. The money is, and I say this as someone who has now signed documents involving very specific, large numbers, just money. It can be earned and lost and earned again, and it doesn't tell you anything fundamental about a person's value. I knew that when I had very little of it, and I know it now. The problem was that he never thought to look. That he was so settled in his own version of our story, the one where he was the serious career, the real earner, the impressive one, that he never once turned the camera around and asked what I might be building in the frame he wasn't looking at. The problem was that I let him. I'd spent years telling myself that needing to be seen was vanity. That a woman who truly knew her worth didn't require acknowledgement. I'd built that philosophy carefully, brick by brick. And I'd lived inside it, and the thing about a philosophy built as a defense mechanism is that it tends to protect you from exactly the things you actually need. I needed to be asked about my work. I needed to be in a partnership where my accomplishments were met with genuine curiosity, not managed with cheerful dismissal. I needed someone who looked at my life and saw what was actually there, not a comfortable background to their own story. I'm still at the firm. I'll be here for at least 5 more years under the terms of the agreement. Probably longer if I'm being honest with myself. Because I built this place, and I'm not ready to leave it. We're growing. The Vancouver group has opened doors to projects across the country that I didn't have the capital to pursue on my own. There's a mixed-use development in Halifax we're starting design on next month. A residential community project in Kelowna that I'm genuinely excited about. My team knows what happened, in the broad strokes. They're good people who've been with me through a lot. When the press release went out, my project manager sent a single message to our team chat. We always knew. 3 people sent back the same emoji. I screenshot it and saved it. I moved into a place in Leslieville in March. A converted loft, high ceilings, exposed brick, a wall of windows that faces east so I get the morning light. I designed the layout of the interior myself, obviously. The first morning I woke up there, I lay in bed for 20 minutes just looking at the ceiling, at the light moving across it, at the life that was mine and only mine to account for. I thought about something my business partner, Simone, said to me, months ago now, when I'd first told her about what I'd overheard. She'd listened to the whole thing, quiet the way she is, and then she said, "You know what's interesting? You've never once talked about the firm the way he talks about his job. You've never needed to announce it." She was right. And she was also, without meaning to, identifying exactly what had gone wrong. I'd been so committed to not needing to announce it that I'd let it disappear entirely, let myself become, in the story we were telling as a couple, the supporting character in someone else's narrative of success. I'm done with that particular role. Not bitterly, I want to be careful here, because I think the bitterness is a trap too, a different way of letting someone else determine the shape of your life. But firmly, with the same calm I had standing at my kitchen window watching the kettle boil, the same calm I had in the boardroom in February, the same calm I have now. I know what I've built. I know what it cost, in time and in the quieter currencies, the dinners I missed, the weekends I worked, the parts of myself I poured into this firm before it gave anything back. I know the names of every person on my team. I know which projects I'm proudest of and which ones taught me the most and which ones I'd do differently. I know that I am not comfortable and forgettable. I know that I never was. And I know this is the part I wish I'd understood sooner. The thing I'd go back and tell the woman who turned a page she hadn't read and went to make tea, that knowing it privately is not the same as living it out loud. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say, "Look at what I built." You are allowed to be in a partnership where you don't have to hide your own accomplishments to keep the peace. You are allowed to stop making yourself easy to overlook. That's not vanity. That's just the truth. And the truth, I've learned, tends to find its way out eventually, through press releases, through conversations you weren't meant to overhear, through quiet Tuesday mornings when the light finally comes in at exactly the right angle and you see, clearly and completely, exactly where you are.